I get the opportunity to have a lot of conversations here, and sometimes those conversations are just fun. They're just plain old flat out fun. Then other times they're really moving and meaningful and maybe even move us to emotion. But other times those programs and those conversations are just informative, like necessary. We need to know what we're talking about. And today we're having one of those conversations. You're gonna need to pull up a chair. You, your spouse, if you have a teenager, make your teenager pull up a chair because this conversation really could save their life and yours. Stay tuned. Well, hey there. I am saying welcome back to you. And the reason why I'm saying welcome back is because, as always, we have two parts to every conversation that we're having. And this is part two of a great conversation. Actually, we've had not just a conversation, it's been a rescue story. It's been a story of victory as we've met a young lady who was on the verge of just tragedy. And the Lord, in his providence, along with her faithful parents and some friends, rescued her at the brink of what could have been disaster. And so we've been talking to MacKenzie and her mom, but we're adding a couple of wonderful folks to this conversation who are going to help us to all be equipped to navigate social media, the internet, our technological age as best as we possibly can. So would you guys please help me to welcome the Straubs that are here today. We are so glad that you're here. So glad that you're here. Now, MacKenzie, for those who haven't watched part one, I'm going to tell them to go find it. They need to go find it and watch the whole story. But give us in a nutshell what happened in your life 3.5 years ago.
I met a guy very innocently through an online chat site, and we added each other on Facebook, and through a year, he would start manipulating me, pulling me away from my friends, family. Eventually, I even converted religions, and I eventually thought he was the only one for me, thought I loved him, and I planned to leave the country to go to Kosovo to marry him without my parents knowing.
And just about 3 weeks or so before you were about to head out the door, passport in hand, your parents, sort of the sovereignty of God, made it so that you all were able to find out and help to rescue your daughter.
Right. We found out 25 days before she was going to leave, and we were actually able to stop her 3 days before she was to get on the plane.
How often are you guys seeing, first of all, thank you for being here. And tell us, before we jump into some details here, just tell us sort of what your mission is, what you are all about as a couple, and what you like to help other families sort of navigate in their lives.
You want me to do that? Okay, I'll do that. So we, our heart is really for the next generation of parents, or for our kids. Our kids are 5 and 3, so we have young kids. We're both counselors, trained counselors, and so our heart has been to say, Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, the true test of a moral society is the kind of world it leaves to its children. And when we started to look at the culture that our children were being raised in, and I noticed a number of years ago that Fisher-Price started putting iPad holders on baby seat carriers, I started to look at the next generation and say, listen, if we don't do something, understanding the neurobiology, the way God's created our brains, if we don't do something to rewire our kids' brains for relationships and away from screens, we could, and I don't mean to set this up into this tragedy, but we could lose an entire generation of kids emotionally and spiritually to the screen.
Yeah,
and
because
so
they know nothing else. This is the world they live in. They know nothing else other than screens, personal screens that you can just use your thumb or your finger to get anything that you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So our heart has been, how can we do that? How can we reach our kids' generation? And God has showed us that it's through the parents. We got to reach the parents, because that's where it really begins, is within the context of the home. So that's
So how often are you guys seeing stories that are at least in some way similar to what we've heard about MacKenzie and her family?
Well, and I think, like, for the moms in the room, moms that are watching, I mean, Josh said we have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. I hear stories like MacKenzie, and can I just say how brave you are?
Thank you.
For doing this and for getting up and sharing this, because it is something that I think, as we're listening to her story, we're trying to think, like, there's in some way my family's different, right? Like, my child is different. There had to be something going on in that family or something in her that was missing, and that's why she headed down that path. And we start going through all these things in our brain that surely that would never happen to us. But can we just be honest for a minute? Every single one of us are deceived by our little screens every day.
Not just the teenagers, you're talking about us.
I'm talking about us,
Yeah.
us who think we're grown-ups. And I will tell you this in all honesty, just to be real truthful. This last week, I downloaded an app on my phone that monitors how much time you're spending on your screen. And this is something we talk about a lot, so I'm very aware of it, but I also am aware that it's an issue for me. And I just looked at it this morning, and the statistics said that I was on my own phone 6 hours and 1 minute on average a day, which totaled to 42 hours in my last week. Wow.
Because it's so mindless. We're just sort of glancing at it for a second here, a second
Yes.
there. We're doing a little work on it. We're just sort of mindlessly filling up our time in our day.
And research shows that the average human being picks up, touches, or swipes their phone 2,617 times a day. The average human being.
We're on it all the time.
We're on it all the time. And here's the reality. From a screen perspective, anything you cannot fast from owns you.
Yes. Anything you can't say no to has an illegitimate place of authority in your life.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we have, if what we've experienced can happen to this incredible family, it can happen to anybody, which is why we have to be aware and we have to be able to, I think it starts, as Christy's saying, it starts with us as a parent in the home by saying, listen, if we're going to have these conversations with our kids, we have to be able to have them within ourselves. We have to have them in our marriage, right? So Christy and I have an ENUP, an electronic nuptial agreement, because...
I know, isn't that embarrassing? We have one.
So think about how many times we get defensive if our spouse says, why are you on your phone? Can you get off your phone? And you think about how we react right away. So as we think about from a screen perspective and getting practical, I believe it starts with us as parents. We have to be aware.
Yeah, and I want to spend a little bit more time there talking about that whole idea of saying no and having boundaries personally before we can even talk about helping our teenagers with them. We're addicted to our technology. That's the bottom line. It's addiction. Stephanie was just telling me a moment ago that the last chapter in their book is by a psychologist. A psychologist wrote the last chapter, just talking about the fact that it is actually the same sort of addiction as it would be like to alcohol, or we would think about an addiction to drugs. The same sort of hormonal reaction in the body of that sort of addictive tendency is the exact same for our technology. We were talking in the back about how, anytime you go out to dinner with your friends, to actually talk to your friends, but you can't sit at the table without your phone next to you and answer and check every little buzz that's an addictive tendency. Or you can't do the basic functions of life, like go to the restroom without having your phone you literally got to go find it first before you can actually do the basic functions of life. That's addiction. That's all the signs of addiction. And so how do you suggest that if we see those signs in ourselves that actually I'm not eating without my phone, I can't go to sleep without it being right next to me, checking it, if I'm finding that that's me, how do I start to break ties with what I'm now realizing is an illegitimate master in my own life before I can even help my young people?
Yeah, I would say it starts by, one of the things we do within our 24-hour fast, or within our ENUP, is we have a 24-hour fast. So we'll fast from social media and screens from Saturday sundown to Sunday sundown. And we use it during that time because we don't have a lot going on during that time. So it's unlikely somebody's going to be trying to get a hold of us but we shut down social media, we shut down. And there are periods of times for Christy as well.
Yeah, I'll delete social media apps. So I've just found I can't trust myself.
Yeah.
I wish I could say that I could, but I can't.
Yeah.
So I will delete social media apps that I know when you just habitually go to it, you just realize you've turned it on and you're just keeping scrolling and you don't even know what you're...
And don't you think it'd be helpful to shut off some of the notifications? That every time somebody responds to a Twitter of yours, you don't actually need to have a buzz on your phone every single time.
I've turned off my push notifications for text messages. And so if somebody's trying to get a hold of me via text, I have no dings. It was like it literally
you can feel
I get anxiety.
Yeah, I get anxiety. Yes. And so I keep my ringer turned down, and if I'm expecting a phone call, I keep them scheduled. Research shows also that when we multitask with our screens, it actually makes us way less productive. And so the important thing is to...
Got your television, your iPad over here, your
Yeah.
phone
Exactly
over
right.
here,
Yeah.
everything's going.
Especially when you're watching This Is Us, right? Like, you can't be double screening like during the important
We got to give This Is Us our full
That's
attention.
Exactly right.
Full attention.
So
Because
so-
Randall.
Yeah, I know. So we have this no double screening when we're watching our shows during, like, for our marriage, so that we know that, or when so certain periods of the day where after the kids are in bed, we have just Josh and Christy time with no screens. Because otherwise,
There's no marriage.
there's no marriage. Well, and researchers show we live in it's a state of continuous partial attention, where we never pay full attention to any one thing at any given time, because that phone, 2,617 times a day, even when it's turned off next to us, research shows we are psychologically on, and we're only paying partial attention. Now take that to your family, where you're only paying partial attention to where she's sharing her heart with me, but I might have some emails that work send in, and I might have to be, so I got half of her, or maybe even 3/4, but there's a quarter I don't. Or when the kids are going, Mommy, look at me, or my daughter's going, Daddy, look at me, and she's dancing and twirling around the living room, and I'm doing this. And research is showing secondhand screen time, like secondhand smoke, when our kids are saying, look at me,
Wow.
and we're on our phones, is actually increasing, because that's a pleasure part of their brain. You're talking about it being on drugs. What we're doing is we're inhibiting the pleasure system in our toddlers' brains.
Because they don't know what it is to have their dad or their mom just look at them.
Present. And it's
and take
increasing
pleasure.
anxiety in kids.
Okay, so listen, that's some food for thought right there. So I love what you've suggested, which is fast, okay? Find some margin, whether that margin is a 24-hour period, whether that's after 7 p.m. for you, whatever that's gonna be on Wednesdays, family, we're just gonna put, and it really is to remind yourself that your phone is not in charge.
Yeah.
It's just to put some boundary in there, and the reality is we should do that with every aspect of our life, where anything we just enjoy in life, it really is the Sabbath principle from Scripture is what you're describing,
Yeah.
where God has given good gifts for you to enjoy 6 days, but that seventh day, which is just a principle of Sabbath, is just for you to put that aside so you can remind yourself that this thing that you rightfully enjoy is not the boss of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have to remind our flesh that screen is not the boss of us. And if our kids see us doing it, like you said with the secondhand smoke, when they see that mom can put that down,
Yes.
dad can put that down, then they will begin to at least learn that it's okay to have some distance from that screen in your life.
Yeah.
But moving on to the young people in your life,
Yeah.
so we've got a technological age. I've got boys that I'm raising. The older two my 15-year-old just got a phone. And I mean, I went kicking and screaming. I mean, just, no, I did not want to put a phone in his hands. He's a responsible young man, responsible young lady. But it's the age we live in.
Yeah.
So if our kid is gonna have a phone, we've deemed them responsible. We've had the conversation with our spouse. We've done all the safeguarding that we can. What other suggestions or what kinds of things do parents need to be mindful of? What do we need to be watching for? What can we do to keep our kids safe, given the culture that we live in right now?
Yeah, and I think I think one of the things that you've seen within the context of these two is the incredible, and we've been seeing it, is the incredible relationship that they have now.
Yeah.
There was a foundation laid in this relationship here, and so at the end of the day, you said you felt like you did everything you possibly could, and there are strategies that we can put into place, but I think we want to hone in first and foremost on that relationship. It's got to start with that relationship. And so one of the things that I describe it as is for parents to become students of your kids, for parents to become students of their interests. You talked earlier about a family gaming. One of the biggest cries that I hear from fathers when I do father-son events is, I wish my son would stop playing so many video games. But the cry from the sons is, I just wish my dad would play video games with me. And those are in separate rooms. And so I think we have to really hone in on becoming champions of our kids' hearts and becoming students. Tell me about the app that you're on. Tell me about the latest, technology you're using, where we become students of what they're doing so that we can stay with them and we can learn. But that takes relationship. It takes humility as a parent, where we're not just always coming over with this authority of going, you need to listen to me, you need to listen. No, you know a lot more about technology than I do. Why don't you start teaching me a little bit? Yeah. And so I think it really begins in the context of that relationship first and foremost. Those foundations have got to be there.
And those
Okay.
apps are always changing, like all the time. I mean, I'm 22 and I'm finding myself talking to middle schoolers like my brother and saying, what am I missing? You know, because I mean, when I speak to high schoolers, I'm missing some things and I'm only 4 years older than them, you know?
Yeah, because it's just new stuff all the time.
All the time.
And one of the things we talk often about is parents becoming digital mentors to their kids. You know, you talk about, 15 years old, you went, kicking and screaming. But there's a reality. You didn't want to wait till he was 18 to give him a phone,
Right.
because we don't want to police our kids till they're 18. We want to teach them to learn how to police themselves.
You sound like my husband. That's exactly what he said.
So I mean, the reality is, but coming with that, we are championing and becoming students of our kids as it relates to the apps, but we're also mentoring our kids as it relates to relationships, as it relates to who they're surrounding themselves with. 1 Corinthians 15 says, bad company corrupts good character. If you're hanging out with anybody who's telling you to isolate yourself, if you're hanging out with anybody, if you're dating somebody who's saying, I think you need to start pushing those friends away, you need to do a gut check, and you need to have other people who are going to speak truth into your life and say, now wait a second here. And I think that's where parents come along as digital mentors to their kids and digitally mentor them in the context of relation. Because all screens will ever do, and you guys are an incredible, screens are built for broadening relationships. They're not meant for deepening them.
You have many friends, but not any intentional friendships and depths. Okay, you all said something interesting to me about the people that are CEOs and running these companies that are building and making all of these creations that we're enjoying technologically.
Yeah. So the chief technology officer of eBay, as well as executives at Yahoo, Google, Apple, and HP, all send their kids to a 9-classroom school in the Silicon Valley. It's called Waldorf schooling, where technology is completely omitted. Steve Jobs would not allow his kids on the iPad. Bill Gates only allowed his daughters on the internet for 45 minutes a day. And he didn't allow his daughters to have a phone until they were 13. And even when they got it as a phone, they were only allowed to use it as a phone. There was no data involved. The guy today who created the actual Facebook like button doesn't even use social media and technology at all. So the question that I ask parents is, if the people creating these devices are protecting their children, what do they know about it that we don't?
And what do they know about it that we don't?
I believe it has to do with creativity and boredom. Research shows
awesome.
it takes at least 15 to 20 minutes of boredom for creativity and imagination to kick in. And so if we can train our kids' brains to be bored and become imaginative and actually think, they're going to be the leaders in the future. They're going to be the ones leading society, because they're not the ones just following along. So if we allowed our kids boredom and creativity and imagination, they're going to lead. They're going to lead, and they're going to lead well.
Because y'all remember when we were growing up, we were bored. And our parents would say, go outside and play.
Yeah.
We would go outside, we'd grab our bike, we'd play tag, we would come up with something to do. And I find that with my sons as well. When I say to them, you know what, guys, just nothing. Like, Mom, we're going to take a car ride and we can't, nothing. Just everybody put everything down. It takes a little while to get past all of the, And then, after about 15 minutes, one person starts a conversation and someone else chimes in, and then all of a sudden the Uno cards come out and they're shooting basketball together and we're playing Monopoly, and it takes a minute. And the hard thing for us is allowing them the gift to be bored. We keep robbing that gift from them every time we put a screen in front of them. That's awesome.
And I think too, we speak about them as if they're dumb. They're very, very smart. And I think if the kids can get this information as teenagers, college students especially, when you talk to them about creativity and boredom, I mean, they want to succeed. They want to be different a little bit. They want to have an edge on their peers. And I think if they can hear this data where they see examples of people who've excelled in life, and because they've taken a little different path.
A little different path.
Right? I mean, Jesus says, like, broad is the way that leads to destruction. If you walk into a coffee shop, if you walk into a park nowadays, I remember being at Disney World. I mean, it's supposed to be the most magical place on earth. Literally walking around with people staring at their phones, thinking, if we're at this place in society where Disney World isn't enough to entertain us, where are we headed? But if we can instill that in our children, that example, and to say, what if we could take the narrow way, the way that it has a bit of an edge for you? And I think it starts, like Josh said, it really goes back to us. And that is why we started with the ENUP, the electronic nuptial agreement, because we had to sit down. It caused so much strife between the two of us. And we knew if it was causing strife between us, like, this has to be an issue among other marriages. But we had to sit down and come to an agreement of what, like, let's just talk about it. A 24-hour fast might not be appropriate for your family. Whatever different stipulations you wanted to put in place, you find it works for you. But once you've agreed to that, when someone breaks the rules, you're a little bit softer in the conversation because you realize, we did agree to that. I get it. Okay.
And speaking of agreements, I am certainly not the expert here, but I will say that someone suggested to us, and we've done that. We had a contract with our boys. We literally typed up a contract. And basically said the rules, by 8 p.m., 7 p.m. or so, your phone is in the kitchen plugged up where all of our things are plugged up. And there's just some things we agreed to, when you're at the dinner table or when someone is talking to you or at any table, you do not have your phone with you. And they agreed to it. And if in any way you do not, align yourself here, then we're the parents, and I hear a lot of parents say, I could just hear my grandmother in my head because I hear a lot of parents say, but I just don't know how to get my 11-year-old to, give me their phone. And I can hear my grandmother saying, you're the parent. Just put your foot down and make the choice. And it's going to be a hard choice because it's like detoxing your kid.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
So it is going to be a struggle.
And that's one of the things we help parents do is set a media agreement, a family media agreement within the context of the family. And we really encourage parents because what it's doing is you're also building the problem-solving part of the teenager's brain, which teenagers typically live in one moment, or they live in here and not yet. Like they can't see tomorrow. Like they can't see like it's either here or not yet. And so what we're doing is when we tell parents to set a family media agreement, we're doing exactly what you've done in your home, is saying, let's have our kids give insight into what the rules are gonna be and what the consequences are gonna be. Because teenagers will typically set harsher consequences for themselves than what the parents would set. But you let them do that, and then you come back a month or 2 months later and reevaluate and say, okay, do we need to relax? Do we need to keep? But what it does, the parents have the control, but the teenagers have say in how much screen time they're getting, what they're using, and that type of thing. And so that's another great way to practically put this into place. We also have zero, you mentioned meals, we have zero screen time at any meals in our home. So I would also...
got to guard that time around the table when we get it, because it's so hard to get it as it is. MacKenzie, looking back, what could have been done to help you with this? Could anything have been done earlier in the process to sort of circumvent some of the longevity of it?
I think that we all hear, don't do this because it's dangerous, and a lot of times, they'll say, don't do this because I told you so. And I would always say, well, why, and sometimes parents just say, well, because I said, and, sometimes that definitely is appropriate, but a lot of times, and I've seen it with the high schoolers that I've talked to, just saying, well, because I said is not good enough, They want a real reason. And if they don't get a real reason, then they don't really care.
I grew up in the day when we didn't get reasons.
Yeah, I know.
We just did it because Mama said you better do it.
Sorry. But that's the thing, they and if they don't have a real reason, then they don't see the reason why they can't. And I think that if I was not just told don't do this because there's dangerous people out there, but don't do this because there's dangerous people out there, and here's an example, and here's another example, and this is real, and it really will happen to you, like it happened to this girl, just like you, I think I really would have. And
that's why you're such a blessing, because you guys, the students that you're speaking to, seeing your face actually gives them a up-close personal illustration and helps bring it home to them. What else would you guys suggest? What other kind of practical things can a parent watching right now be mindful of if they want to help to safeguard their family? I love the title of your book, by the way, which is called Safe House. I love that. It's a great title. How can we make sure our house is as safe as possible for our kids?
Yeah, it really comes down, and the subtitle of that is How Emotional Safety is the Key to Raising Kids Who Live, Love, and Lead Well. because when our kids have what I describe as emotional bullets being shot at them every single day, from peer pressure to messaging to the apps that they're on, all that type of thing. If they don't have a safe place to land, if they don't have a safe place to be able to process that information, if they don't have a safe place, and it doesn't have to be the parent, as MacKenzie's example, I mean, as you get a little bit older, sometimes, I just had an example the other day. Our pastor says, there was something I said to his son, and he listened to me, and his dad's like, no, wait a second, I've been telling you that, right? We don't listen to our parents all the time. But if we surround our family and our kids with those other voices, it's Deuteronomy 6, hear, O Israel. It's not just up to us as parents, but we want to put a tribe around us. We want to put, the community, the church around our kids to be speaking those same voices into our kids. Our ability to be able to do that in a safe way is really powerful. And so when our kid, that they have a safe place to land, they have a safe place to go. And so if they don't trust mom and dad, well, maybe I can go to, my dad's friend, or maybe I can go to my uncle, or maybe I can go to somebody else that I just don't feel totally safe divulging all this information, but there's somebody else who I know that I can trust that's going to do that. And so that's really our heart as it relates to that.
Well, and what I think is great about MacKenzie's story is it was her friend. I mean, it was her friend
that went and told their parents.
Yeah.
That reached out to you.
And oftentimes we talk to youth, and they're afraid to come forward and say something because they're afraid that their friend may find out, or maybe they're wrong. If they think maybe their friend's in drugs and they go and they tell their friend's parents and they're wrong, that can be embarrassing. But I tell kids all the time that it is better to go forward and say something when it turns out you really didn't have to, than to not do it when you really did need to. Because we're talking about saving lives. If my friends didn't come forward, I really don't think I'd be here today. And it's also important to note that youth and kids, they don't have to go forward and be the hero and say, I'm gonna make this stand and I'm gonna tell your parents or whatnot, but you can do it anonymously. My friends went through their parents, and that's important. They can do it without being that person that comes up and kind of exposes themselves in that way.
And there's a lot of shame. I mean, you carried a lot of shame in what you did. And so there's a lot of shame for kids today carrying around with those emotional bullets being shot at them. So I would really encourage parents, don't add more shame because that's not safe. If we're condemning, if we think we have to come down hard with truth all the time, truth without grace will always be received as condemnation. And so if we feel as parents like we have to come down hard and you should be listening to me and you shouldn't be doing this, all it's going to do is, and they're going to find another place to go, and it's just going to build a deeper wall between our child's hearts and ours. And so we got to always lead in grace. Jesus came full of grace and truth. And so if we're stewards of God's good grace, leading in grace first and then following up in truth, we're able to put those limits down, but where our kids feel, and I use the golden rule, do it unto others as you would have them do unto you. But replace the word do with the word understand. In order to be understood as a parent, we must first understand. And so if we can seek first to understand where our kids are coming from, why do they want to use that app? Why do they want to be on social media? Why do they want this particular, device? If we can seek to understand first in a non-condemning way, they feel empathized with, and then therefore it opens the door for us to speak truth and set those limits.
Yeah.
So that's,
Oh, I was gonna say my dad, we had this conversation, it was about 8 months after everything happened. And my dad sat me down, we were at a coffee bar, and I hadn't talked about it with my family at all. We didn't talk about it. And I just wanted to forget about it. And he said, MacKenzie, I know that you feel every time you look at us, you think we're constantly thinking about what you did, but we're not. And he said, we have forgiven you, and you need to forgive yourself. And that was my moment of kind of realizing that I had been running from this, this whole time. And I needed to own it, because you have that choice. You can either run from it or own it. And, like you said, it's okay to be embarrassed. I feel like oftentimes youth carries this around and they just want to hide it all the time. But it is okay to feel embarrassed and maybe use your story. Not necessarily have to tell everybody in the world, but be okay with using your story to come forward and tell somebody else if you need it, because you can change lives that way.
Yeah, you guys have been so helpful. All of you have been. Thank you for sharing your story, seriously. Thank you, Mom, for letting her and for chronicling that story, because I think a lot of people, a lot of young lives in particular, older as well, are going to be salvaged because they just are able to put a face with this whole thing. And then thank you guys for wisdom, the specifics and the details about how we can be mindful about our households and our families. If you didn't get anything out of this, you weren't really listening, I don't think. But if there's anything I'm sort of taking away, it's boundaries, some margin in there to remind yourself that your phone is not in charge of you, not the boss of you. But not only boundaries, also boredom. The gift of boredom. Give yourself back that gift. Creativity in your life, imagination, ideas, the ability to have and foster beauty in your relationships, the ones that matter the most. That's all contingent upon some margin in your brain space, some opportunity to be bored every once in a while. Give your kids that gift this week. Give them boredom in Jesus' name. Come on, y'all. Thank you for being on the program today.